Black Sheep Shipping presents Destroy the Host. Content warnings can be found in the description.
This is intended for the head of the Health Emergencies Program of the World Health Organization. I would speak for hours if I could, but by necessity, I'll keep this as concise as I'm able. My name is Anders Nielsen. I graduated the University of Copenhagen in 1985 as a Doctor of Medical Science, specializing in cancer. I similarly earned an equivalent degree as Lars Hansen at the University of Moscow in 1925, Olav Lindberg before that in 1862, and so on dating back to the first class of Oxford. I don't expect you to believe me outright. I couldn't tell you how old I am if I tried. By the time I realized how much time was passing, it was too late to keep any accurate measure. What I mean to say is that I have been a doctor for almost as long as the profession has existed. The first medicine I studied still involved incantations and spells. I've updated considerably since then. The reason for this is to bring to your attention a disease that is highly localized to the northern portion of the Scandinavian region. It has persisted here since prehistory, and apparently will outlive me. As the one who discovered it, I've named it Dakar, an Old Norse word for the dark. The disease requires a specific host and is well adapted to the environment here, which is why I believe it has never spread outward, despite clear evidence of many failed attempts. The infection is a negative-sense RNA virus, which manages to persist chronically while causing rapid tissue growth, very much like cancer. While there is no virus I've identified as a similar pathology, the closest being rabies, Dakar has one very specific requirement to exist chronically. There is a genetic sequence on my 12th chromosome that is unique to a long-dead genetic subgroup which allows for incredibly efficient cellular repair. It invades the nuclei of host cells, inhibiting tumor suppressor genes and proliferates. Without the Jotun gene family, the host dies quickly and painfully, their body being completely unable to handle the uncontrolled growth and cytotoxicity. Essentially, they die of cancer. I've observed this in both animals and humans. It's a nasty thing. It also enjoys a lower core body temperature, which I do have. It's actually so noticeable I have to wear gloves when shaking someone's hand. Luckily, it is not yet possible for a human or animal host to infect others. They die so quickly that while an infective dose of virions can be produced, the fissures in the skin that allow the blood to exit the body do not develop. Ultimately, the primary source of transmission is bloodborne. Nearly every possible chronic host was infected, likely within a year of the original outbreak. This, under normal circumstances, this would doom a disease. But its unique biology allowed it to persist. The cancerous tissues became filled with hundreds of organoids, small incomplete versions of the original organs which eventually lose functionality. For example, I have found lung organoids connected to wounds in the skin, allowing a host to breathe without a head. Heart organoids are so frequently developed that all subjects have severe tremors from the vibration. Something I originally thought was caused by brain organoids, developing along major nerves causing muscle spasms. Actually, to be honest, I'm still not sure. They're difficult and dangerous to observe while alive, and fucking hard to kill. Other organoids I've found include liver, kidney, bone, eyes, ears, or rather eardrums. Mouths usually leading to a simple esophagi. This diverse and decentralized organ function makes them durable to say the least. At most, they can be slowed before entering a regenerative dormant phase. This is the easiest time to study them, and the closest thing there is to a safe window to approach. This regeneration occurs frequently and quickly. Hosts tend to live in large groups underground and fight nearly continuously, often for the purpose of cannibalizing one another. This regeneration is a necessity. As for reproduction, I've only ever observed it once in a captive host. Without organized bowels, hosts have no way to release their feces, a problem that they seem very aware of. The subject had recently fed on something almost equal to it in size when it was captured. I'll leave it to the imagination what that was, but after only 3 hours of digestion, the host began to claw along its midsection. Initially, I assumed this was unique behavior, a reaction to being so close to an uninfected host. Zoonosis, isolation, I really didn't know. Now, I believe this was meant to relieve the pressure building in its chest and stomach. Bacteria still exist in their intestines, which means the production of gas. As painful as it must be to tear into your own stomach with your hands, the alternative must be much worse. The injuries needed were severe, and deep enough to cause it to nearly completely separate. For the next 3 days it fell motionless, breathing, bleeding, and growing. The bottom half swelled until a single arm emerged from its left side along with a small squat head, or at least a facsimile of one biting through the skin. The top half had less issue, creating crude legs, but spent an unnecessary amount of time growing a second head. I believe that this type of growth is mostly uncontrolled, and limbs that are in disadvantageous locations are removed violently by others. By the time it had been captive for a week, they had already developed enough to begin fighting. This process is likely responsible for the continued generation of trolls. One symptom that is central to this, so central that it inspired the name Dakar, is the presence of high levels of a variant of myoglobin in the blood. Being a much better storer of oxygen, they can survive without a direct source for long enough to be able to grow new lungs if they're lacking. This prevents oxygen deprivation from killing them if you, for example, remove the head. This myoglobin variant also causes their blood to be black and causes a graying of the skin. The fissures I mentioned transport this blood to the surface of the skin, where it can be easily introduced to wounds they cause others. The production of high levels of myoglobin require high levels of iron. This makes them very attracted to the smell of blood and also explains their choice of caves. My brother and I have almost always found them in caves which have exposed iron ore deposits. It's unclear if they dig for them or are attracted to already exposed veins. In Norway, we collected iron in the form of bog ore, natural deposits that precipitate in groundwater, marshes, etc. Sometime in the 3rd century, a Roman legion moved too far north into an infected area. It could have been part of their constant expansion or just protection for merchants. Rome was so hungry for iron that they would travel long distances to collect it. The Romans weren't always invaders. Sometimes they made you rich. We found bodies spread out over a 2-kilometer area. At the center, we found broken carts full of glass goods and bronze that typically would have been traded for iron bars. I suspect that the trolls being attracted to iron smelled their swords and armor. They were practically seasoning themselves. It's almost funny that they would have been safer traveling unarmed. Try explaining that to a soldier. Returning to pathology. While most seem to have patches of hair, some have plates of bone and keratin protruding from the skin. Hosts covered in hair can be mistaken for animals at a distance, while those covered in plates blend more easily into more mountainous terrain at the cost of lower mobility due to increased size and weight. I don't think they can get as large as the stories depict them, given the way they tend to tear themselves in half. One dangerous and common type is created when a limb is severed. The trolls that develop are much smaller and harder to notice, allowing them to get much closer than the rest. They also cry like children. Normally, when we find victims, we find them after the attacks. That is to say, we find pieces. About 5 years ago, my brother and I were tracking a group that moved too far south. Direct conflict is a death sentence, so we obey traps and let them do the work. We spent the day digging a wide pit, which we filled with curved spikes meant to hook and hold infected hosts that fall into them. It doesn't kill them, but when we check them the next day, we'll douse them in gasoline or diesel. We misjudged how many there were. There are ways we can hide from them and remain relatively safe sleeping in shifts. But at dusk, while I was watching the mouth of the cave, I heard music coming over the hill. A car had ignored a roadblock and stopped at exactly the wrong time. They were in their early 20s, probably just looking for somewhere remote to drink and be young. I wanted to climb out of the tree stand and warn them, but my brother stopped me. He knew that by the time I'd gone to them, the sun would be down. Minutes later, the pack we were hunting ran from the cave mouth directly to the road. There was no moment of confusion, no smelling the air. They already knew exactly where the car was. To their credit, most of the kids saw them and ran back to their car, but two of them were too focused on each other or the beer. It's never quick. Trolls don't think to kill, they just start eating. The rest that did make it to the car didn't have the sense to turn off the music. I'll never forgive them for that. I watched with binoculars as the car rocked back and forth before they finally broke the windshield. I can't imagine how they felt seeing those warped, scarred faces pressed against the glass. The next day, we found some IDs. Just some Swedish kids. Some act as ambush predators. Some are solitary, and some, obviously, hunt in packs. Once, I found a troll that had grown into the shape of a small tree, rooted in the ground and subsisting off the birds that landed on it. Ultimately, there are too many presentations of the disease for me to describe in the time I have. They all are generated from the same infection. I've used the word troll a few times now. I'd like to address that. Trolls are a piece of folklore that sprung out of encounters with hosts of this disease. I may have contributed to that myself over the years, but this is a virus. This is a medical phenomenon that needs to be studied and eradicated. There is no mysticism here. The folklore only takes the vague shape of the truth. The sun does not turn them to stone, although they are photophobic. UV radiation, given time and prolonged exposure, causes considerable genetic damage through the formation of thymine dimers. Essentially, they are extremely susceptible to skin cancer. I believe that the myth about them turning to stone comes from misunderstandings about the nature of their grey skin and unusual bone formation. Most people have abandoned the regions that have the highest concentration of infection, but for many years I've been watching the signs that it may mutate the ability to either jump the species barrier or into the general population. I believe that the most viable host population crossed the land bridge into the Americas while it was still open, and Jotnar, being a seafaring people, would have been able to make this journey even without it. This made me concerned that it could spread into a susceptible population across the Atlantic. I've been to the Americas many times, but I've never found evidence of others like us. Instead of finding viable hosts, the virus found a different solution. New strains have incorporated some of the necessary segments of the Jotnar gene family into their own genetic material, effectively taking the part of the original host that it needed with it. This process is incomplete, but progressing at an alarming rate. Today, I was returning from a talk in Oslo. I've been gone for a few months. I thought I'd surprise my brother. On the way here, farther out than I thought possible, I saw a little girl on the road, walking alone. I actually almost hit her turning the corner. I'm still human, so I obviously stopped the car and tried to talk to her. A little girl alone on the road in rural Norway is not something anyone can just pass by. She was dressed, but non-verbal. Her clothes were torn and dirty. I knew something terrible had happened, but I guessed wrong at the nature of it. I had assumed some form of abuse. I carried her to the car and began driving to the nearest town that might have a hospital. Even as a doctor, there's not much I could do in that situation. Honestly, I was upset at the idea of it. While driving, she was turned away from me. I thought she was crying. I pitied this girl. I know what it's like to experience childhood trauma. My childhood was spent fleeing danger and half starving during winters. It was a while before the poor girl moved from that position. When she did, it was only to loosely shake her arm. It wasn't violent. It was slow. I told myself she wanted me to hold her hand. She did, in a way. I felt her bite deep into my palm, gnawing. I nearly crashed into a tree, but managed to stay on the road somehow. At this point, she was flailing wildly, only held in place by the seatbelt. That seatbelt is the only reason I'm able to make this recording now. If she had bitten me somewhere closer to my neck, I would have been in much worse condition. I destroyed the host with some tools I keep in the trunk. I found bite marks on her arm where she'd been chewing on a wound. She was very human, but still was further along in the progression of the disease than I had ever seen. I was unsure if there had been enough virions in her blood to produce an infective dose of the virus. It didn't matter. In an abundance of caution, I removed my hand with a saw. It's quite the challenge finishing my drive one-handed. My car's a manual, and it was my left hand. It looks sort of like my uncle now. I made the decision to make this recording when I noticed my severed hand blackening. The infection is present, and given its blood-borne nature, I have to assume that traces had already spread through my system. In a way, I'm lucky. Most people don't get a chance to do this. I studied this disease in others for so long, I think it made me numb to the fact that they all used to be people. I always assumed that they weren't there anymore. No one left inside the monster. The IV bag, which I started myself on when I first got to my lab, contains antimetabolites like methotrexate, as well as CDK inhibitors and irinotecan. You'll recognize this as chemotherapy. Aggressive chemotherapy. The doses I'm on could kill a horse. The other IV you see is what will hopefully save me from the fate of that horse. This is a cocktail of proteins I've collected from my blood that are responsible for that miraculous cell repair I keep talking about. I'm finally getting a chance to test if I can get them into my cells using the liposomes that I've made in-house. If I can't, at least the chemo should kill me before the disease can take hold. Immediately after being exposed, I administered a prophylactic vaccine that, while theoretical, has been tested on survivors before. I hope I have better luck. It only prolonged their deaths, so eventually I stopped trying. I'm also the first person to ever be exposed who has prior vaccination history for the disease. I'm obviously the first Jotun. There have been a few close calls over the years. Once, I was doing an autopsy on a troll that we'd starved to death. The gasoline we usually use makes for terrible test subjects after the fact. I'd wanted to examine this troll, in particular, because of slits that were along its neck. They were nothing important, but at the time I was worried they were sprouting gills. Even when examining a dead troll, we strapped them down. We haven't lived this long by being reckless. But the trouble came when I cut into its torso to begin removing organs. Among the typical parts, I found a few strange masses of flesh I didn't recognize. That itself isn't unusual, but it was still moving. I picked it up and went to set it on a tray. Before I could even make an incision, a needle-like shard of bone punctured my glove. It let out a high-pitched sound before I contained it. A troll the size of my fist had developed inside the larger body. It felt like the disease had set a trap. We burned the corpse and stopped starving them after that. If it had punctured more than just my glove, I would have died 50 years earlier. That was when I developed this protocol for infection. Even an untested vaccine is better than nothing at all. I'm including with this statement a series of videos, pictures, and other data which support what I've said. Watch them before lunch. They're quite graphic at times. I've also attached a list of names. They're victims who were either able to identify themselves or had ID on their bodies. I'm sure their families would want to know what happened. To add my name to the list for posterity, my real name is Magni. Just Magni. Moody. I've written down instructions about what to do. Keep the generator running, and the samples they'll need will be safe in the freezer. I know what you saw. To have this happen to me after all we've survived, after all you did for me, is unfair. It's cruel. I only pretended not to understand why you were so encouraging of me traveling and pursuing medicine. You wanted to keep me away from this place, to keep guard duty to yourself. My biggest regret is not coming home yesterday while you were here. I'm sorry. I have to leave you alone again. I'm going to chain myself to the bed after my next dose of antivirals. But if you see me starting to show symptoms, I need you to remember that it won't be me. It's the hardest thing I've ever asked you to do, and you're the only one I know strong enough to do it. I need you to destroy the host.
Lloyd Warren speaking. Is this an emergency?
Hi, Lloyd. I was hoping for... Lloyd, please. It won't take long.
Lloyd Warren speaking. You can't call here.
I can't talk to hospital staff, but they didn't want you to have benefits, so they made you contractors.
There's a real opportunity to move up in the ranks right now, Diana. You know they fired every man we had on shift that night? Security's not looking so good right now. Not at all. 90% of my job is reducing the number of silver alerts we're responsible for. I take pride in that, Diana. Real pride.
I know, but this isn't about that.
Oh, let's see. A nurse was gutted and hung from a tree. 3 more gone, but they forgot to take their blood with them. You were the only doctor on the security feed, and you weren't even supposed to be there.
I was supposed
anything you say to me inherently has to do with that, right?
I just want your help with something.
I can't help you.
You only need to install some security cameras. You can definitely handle this. I already have the equipment, I just don't know how to hook them all up.
Do I need to be more specific then? I won't help you.
Please, Lloyd.
Oh, why me, Diana?
Because we were friends. And because no one will talk to me.
This is for your home, I'm assuming.
Yeah, just to make me feel better. I'm not used to living alone anymore.
I have Saturday off, but I'll come by around 8. Just remember to order my pizza.
This episode was written, directed, and edited by D.V. Clarke. Magni was played by Chris CovVikingVoice Coleman. Diana Silver was played by Taylor Shaye. And Lloyd Warren was played by Seamus Gibney. A special thanks to Dr. Kaylin Wong. This episode was announced by Alexander Handley, with a musical theme by Onlooker Air, and cover art by OddOblivion. This episode of Black Sheep Shipping is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. Thanks for listening.